Kelly of Atheist, how are you today?
I'm fantastic. How are you, Mark?
Welcome to 69 Faces of Rock.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Kelly, tell me about your beginnings with music. When did it start for you?
Started when I was about 13. Started playing guitar when I was 14, and I I spent a year like tripping on acid and smoking pot, and I taught myself to play in a year's time, and then it was just right at the time where Metallica was breaking, and early Slayer, and I was really into Maiden and Priest and stuff like that, and I had also a really good rooted musical history in Black Sabbath and Deep Purple and shit like that, so it was this progression of music that I liked, and then once I was able to play guitar, I just gravitated towards the heavier shit, and then by 16 I had a band, and it was essentially the only band I've ever had. It was Ravage at the time, and then here we are, 30 some odd years later.
That's right. Musically, I mean, you instantly had a very original style, very different from what was going on. What would you attribute this to?
A wide variety of roots. I think it's important to have a good musical palette and listen to a lot of different things. I think one of the worst things you can do as a young musician is pigeonhole yourself and only listen, because metal is that way. Kids are very segregated. Well, I'm into deathcore and I'm into fucking thrash, and it's kind of segregated sometimes, not always, but in terms of playing, I think it's important to go back and listen to. You got to know what's happened to sort of know what is going to happen, I think, so I think by listening to lots of different kinds of music, it causes you to immediately use those influences, and I think that's what we did. We had influences that were outside of the metal world, so it was Yes, Zappa and all that shit, and then we mixed it with Merciful Fate and Slayer and Metallica, and here we are.
How long did it take you to kind of refine your style?
Still doing it, man. There's still kind of there really is no end to that. There shouldn't be anyway. There's no nobody should can always get better, can always be tighter and heavier and more different. You just got to continue to take chances, and not listen to the app around you. Do what moves you, and you should be able to find some originality and something that also appeals to other people.
So eventually you did get signed back in those days, and you released some records. Can we maybe look at your records? And okay, the first album,
Piece of Time.
Piece of Time, classic.
Yeah, look at these dudes, man. R.I.P. Roger Patterson, of course. Yes. Really integral part of the early days of Atheist, and one of the great things about him was he just had a warm love for all kinds of music as well. He was a big Kiss fan. He also had a good set of roots musically, but he wrote some incredible riffs, and it caused us to sort of have to try to keep up with him. It was very difficult. The riffs he played were very, very, he loved Steve Harris and Iron Maiden, and so did we. So we knew what he was doing, but he would come to practice with these things that caused us to sort of, I, as a guitar player, would sort of orchestrate around it. So if he was playing something that was super busy, to me, I would play notes that were not busy around it, such as songs like I Deny and Piece of Time. The opening bass line to Piece of Time, and he wrote those kinds of riffs, and so it caused us to kind of set a template in a way of no rules. We could bust into weird parts out of nowhere. We always like to do that. Just take a listener from here to here on a dime, and it's fun, to do that. So Roger definitely had a large role in the early days of that.
When that album came out, how did the public react to it?
Not so. There was a handful of writers and sort of a small group, a small group of people around the world that were kind of interested in the difference, between that and everything else that was around at the time. But finding tours and stuff like that, finding bands that were like us was impossible. So it was hard to find bands to tour with. And we had some tough times, man. Anytime you're doing something weird and different, it takes a minute for people to kind of, soak it in. Atheist is never a band that you can listen to just once and kind of get it, you know. And a lot of people, especially music reviewers, will have 10 albums to review in a week, you know. So they pop your album on, let's do it one time, and then write their review. And I think a lot of people missed. It took people a few years, maybe even 15 years, to fully go, oh shit, all right, this is different. This is you know, and it lasts longer. You know what I mean? It doesn't encapsulate itself into a particular time. It just continues to be relevant somehow. You know what I mean? If you write ahead of the curve, I think you can kind of stay relevant. You know.
Eventually, you did get to tour. The first tour with Candlemas, and that's when the unfortunate accident happened.
Yeah, we had toured a little bit in Sweden with Candlemas and made friends with those guys, and they were super cool. And so when they came to America, we did that tour with the, it was just us and Candlemas, and then of course local supports. But it was fun. We had a bus. It was our first tour bus tour, and we just had this really, really great time. And we had to get in a van in LA at the end of the tour and drive it all the way back to Florida. And that's when our crash happened, and we lost Roger Patterson. And, so it was a huge deal. We had, you know, already written Unquestionable Presence, and it was ready to go and ready to be recorded. We just had a little more work to do on it, and it was just catastrophic for us. You know, I mean, it was really hard to deal with.
How did you go about replacing Roger, and how did things turn into with the follow-up album? You want to show it?
Never replaced Roger.
Never replaced
Roger. No. You know, we still continue to try to emulate Roger's bass playing, you know what I mean? And you know, the young man I have right now, Yoav Ruiz Feingold, is he's a beast, and he has a spirit. He has the same spirit as Roger's, this love of music, and always happy, and he can play his ass off. And really grew up listening to Roger's bass lines, and so he's really come the closest to really encapsulating that spirit, you know, that Roger had. And so yeah, it was, that tour. Once we were doing Unquestionable Presence, we asked Doug Kaiser from Watchtower to do the bass lines, because Roger was buried with a picture of Doug Kaiser, and he was a huge Watchtower fan. And sadly, you know, he was like, well, it's not my style, so it kind of rubbed us the wrong way. And we were like, come on, man, you know what I mean? Like, would have been no big deal for him to do, because he's a super talented bass player, and it would have meant the world to us and Roger's family. But anyway, so the next best choice, obviously, not the next best choice, but the only other choice would be Tony Choi. Cynic was kind of a sister band of ours. You know, we had met them and felt a kindred spirit with them, and our love of jazz and complicated music, and trying to do things differently. And so yeah, he jumped on board, and we spent 8 weeks. 8 weeks from the accident, we were in the studio recording it, and it's pretty crazy. He did a great job. You
want to show the record and say maybe a few things you remember from it?
For this one.
All right, so that's
Unquestionable Presence.
Yes.
Tony Choi, and yeah. So like I said, we had a lot of the bass lines written and demoed, and so Tony had to really sit down and kind of figure it out. It was a different era too. It was 1991, and you can't find tablature and videos on YouTube to figure out how to play it all. You had to sit and listen to it 150 times, you know, in order to get it rolling. But yeah, this is my favorite of all the Atheist albums, just because it's top to bottom. There's not a bad minute on this album. It's only 29 minutes, I think, but it's there's a lot of shit in here, a lot of stuff back then. I'm super proud of this record. It's like a child, you know.
And I believe you toured with Cannibal Corpse for this album, right?
We did. Yeah, we did, and that was, you know, that was not the right tour for us, you know. I mean, we got to play for metalheads and everything, but they just, you know, it was just difficult for them. They really wanted fast all the time. They wanted to be able to slam and react to the music, and our music was so weird that it was just hard for them to kind of get it. So it was a pretty rough tour for us.
What would have been a perfect tour back then?
I think it would have been we might have been a little too heavy for somebody like Fate's Warning, but you know, Fate's Warning had a prog, smart metal audience. Awaken the Guardian era of them. I think of who else. I mean, really not. You know, nobody in the extreme metal world that I can think of that would have been, other than Cynic. You know what I mean? But Cynic wasn't signed at the time, so you know, and it's okay to play with bands that are different. It was just that we were this was a whole different time than it is now. There were not as many bands around at that point. Now there's hundreds and hundreds of choices, you know, scenarios and tours to put together. So I can't honestly think of a band. Cannibal Corpse would have been cool because they had a really great bass player, a great drummer. You know, that was really playing some shit that was progressive. That was a band that really that should have been much larger. I'd like to see those guys come back and do something. They were killer.
What happened after that? Because for a while things kind of, like the original lineup went apart.
With Unquestionable Presence?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we did that tour and came home, and Steve Flynn decided he wanted to go to college. And so he bailed. And I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do, so I started putting together the first stages of Neurotica, which was more of a, you know, sort of a rock/metal band. And I was doing that for about a year up in Gainesville, and then I got a call that said, you know, we're supposed to do one more record, and so I didn't have a band, and I quickly assembled the guys that ended up playing on the record. Well, actually, I assembled a different band first, a different drummer, a different bass player, to get started, and I started writing my ass off, and about a week and a half into that, called Tony Choi, and we had met Josh Greenbaum, who played on the album. He was River Phoenix's drummer in a band called Alak's Attic, and we had hung out with him while we were doing the Neurotica sessions at the same studio we ended up going into for Atheist, which was Pro Media in Gainesville. And the engineer there was Mark Kadzielawa, and he had worked with Zappa and helped Zappa build his studio, and so we loved that. We were like, oh, let's move away from more sound, let's go try that out, you know. And so we did, and you know, and that was 40 days from the first riff to the final mix. I mean, it was a really super exciting, fun time. It was like
and that became
Elements.
Elements.
Yes.
And what do you think about the music now?
What do I think about the music? The music. What do I think about this music?
Yep.
I mean, I think the musically it's great. You know, I wish we could re-record it. You know, the production on it is the first digital record that we ever did, so it doesn't sound quite the way that we hoped that it would or that it could. But there's some really incredible performances on this album that have stood the test of time. And I think Rand Berkey did a phenomenal job. His solos are the best things he'd ever done. And Tony Choi masterfully put together a really strange Latin metal sound that I think it's emulated a lot today, and played a big role in the rhythm section on the album, because everything was moving so fast. He kind of worked on the rhythm section, and I worked on the guitar stuff, and then the vocals I wrote at the last minute, which ended up just being great. You know, just a cool theme about something that means a lot to us. We're not religious guys, kind of believe more in nature and earth, and so it was the perfect combination. So I'm super proud of it.
Were you able to do any shows for this? Any tours for this album?
Yeah, we toured with Benediction.
Okay.
And had a great time with those guys. Loved them, and we had a blast with them. And came home from that tour, and you know, Rand. It was just different. We had a lot of difficulties getting along, and that was it. You know, that was pretty much dissolved, and I started with Neurotica and spent the next 10 years working on that.
Now that you go back to those first 3 albums, how do you feel about them?
They're my children. You know, I mean, I love them. Love them. I'm proud of them, and I'm pleased that, you know, we finally get to come out and, after all these years, play. Tonight we're playing 3 songs we haven't played in 30 years. So it's a lot of fun to break those back out on a metal audience, you know, 3 decades later, you know, and so I love it. It's great.
Do you think the audience is finally caught up to what you were doing?
I do, even beyond in some ways. You know, I mean, I think that it's important for a new technical metal fan to not look at me, because I mean, what we're doing now, I mean, there's bands, you know, Between the Buried and Me is fucking insane. You know, I mean, Animals as Leaders is insane. It's far more technical than what Atheist is. But you have to, you know, you got to kind of look at just like you can look at a band like Down. It's very Black Sabbath influenced, but you can't snub Black Sabbath and say, well, I only listen to Down now. You know what I mean? There's a respect thing. There's a pecking order. You know what I mean? That you don't get one without the other. And so I hope that tech death fans will you know, appreciate the history and how hard it was to play this kind of music and be technical back in the late 80s, early 90s. It was fucking hard, man. Nobody wanted to hear it. Everybody just wanted, you know, straightforward fucking madness. And
But the Atheist story did not end there, right? You came back. Tell me about that and what led to Jupiter eventually.
So I guess it was 15 years later, maybe 16 years later. I just kind of noticed on the internet, when the internet was becoming a thing, I didn't have any copies of the Atheist records. And when I was on Ozfest 2002 in Neurotica, I ran into the Hatebreed guys and some of the guys in OTEP, different bands, and they were like, what happened to Atheist? What happened to Atheist? And I was really surprised that people remembered Atheist. I mean, I honestly did. I just thought that we were just too weird, and that was it. I just kind of moved away from it, and started hearing, the chatter of about Atheist, and so I just thought, well, I'm going to try to buy the albums on eBay. And upon finding out how much they were, I just thought, wow, and then I just kind of got them back and reissued them on Relapse, and suddenly there was this brand new audience. There was 20 times more than we had when we broke up, interested in seeing us and hearing new music from us. And so we toured for about 3 years. One of the first shows we did was Wacken in Germany, which was just ridiculous. And that was the first moment that we realized, wow, this music did matter. It did stand the test of time, and a lot of the fans of it were younger than, like, the music was older than they were. So that was a really refreshing thing to find out when we went there. And we just thought, well, we'll just keep playing shows. It's fun. And then we got asked to do a new record, and we were like, well, if we can recreate that vibe again, you know what I mean? And then after 3 years or so, we got me and Steve Flynn got in a room, and we wrote Second to Sun, which ended up being one of the songs on Jupiter. And from there, we spent the next 4 months, and once we heard it, we realized that there really is this, there's a special chemistry there between us, and it sounded like Atheist. It was weird because after listening to those records for so many years, when you write something new and it sounds like how we sound, and so it was a lot of fun. We put this together, and it came out in 2010, and I think it had a much more modern production because it needed to. A lot of people really love the record. Some of the naysayers are the purists that like that old school production, but this sounds tremendous. Jason Sukoff mixed it, did a fantastic job, and yeah, I'm super proud of every song on this record. I think it's great, and I encourage people to go back and listen to it, because I know, the three old school ones are the are the core of what people listen to. But I think missing the boat if we don't check this one out. So.
Got it. At this point, you are the only original member from Atheist. How does Atheist work now?
I have a fantastic group of guys. Daniel Martinez, Chris Martin, Yoav Ruiz Feingold, and Apollo on drums, who is the most important difference in us moving forward with Atheist. Obviously, Steve Flynn is a phenomenal drummer and one of a kind, and it's really hard to emulate his drum parts. We spent years trying to find somebody to do it, and do it accurately. And I think right now, this band has never sounded better. It's never been more energetic. It's really, really great. Steve doesn't tour. Doesn't like to tour, and we like to play. And so, Steve gave us his blessing, and with Apollo, and so we've just been really having a great time. We toured with Cattle right before COVID, 2019. Cattle's Decapitation. It was a phenomenal tour, super fun, and we got to play for a lot of new kids that didn't even know we existed. And so that's where we're at now. We're playing. We've got 3 generations of fans, and the music still holds up. Not barely, but with a force, and it's a lot of fun.
Finally, are you still in touch with the original members who started all of it?
I don't speak with Ram Berkey anymore. I know we live in the same town, but we have a lot of mutual friends, but we haven't spoken in a couple of years. Frank Emmy from Elements, I talk to him every couple of years. He's on my Facebook, so we're still friends. Marcel dos Santos, who played live on the Elements tour. I haven't seen him in a while. I'm trying to think of who else. You talking about from the original lineup?
Yeah. Or just any lineup.
It's just Rand, and that's the only other. Obviously, I'd love to talk to Roger, but
that's not possible.
Tony Choi. Yeah, I talk to Tony all the time, And he's coming out to our show in Tampa on June 14th. So.
If you could change anything that you did in the past, would you change anything?
Yeah, I would have flown home from LA at the end of the Candlemas tour. I would have been a rock star, stomped my feet and said, fuck you, buy us plane tickets, don't make us drive 3,000 miles in a fucking Astro van. So, you know, word to the young bands out there, you know, sometimes it's good to stomp your feet and be a rock star and just say, hey, you know, we don't want to drive home, it's too dangerous. You know, we had to get that van back in 2.5 days. We can't do that. We can't drive that far in 2.5 days unless you stay awake for 22 hours, you know. And that was the difference between Roger Patterson being alive and not. You know what I mean? And so that shit pisses me off. So I would change that immediately. I would fly us home, and he would still be here, sitting beside me.
Yep, having fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.